I'm going to address plus argue for and against every controversial opinion in House of the Dragon. This is part 1. Like if you want to see part 2. First controversial take is Daemon choking Rhaenyra is out of character. A big reason why this is controversial is because people at this point felt an emotional connection for Daemon, and seeing his character do something like domestic abuse probably set them off a bit. There's a line between what people think is acceptable for protagonistic characters to be able to do. For example, some people were shocked when Arya had sex in season 8, and a lot of people claimed it felt wrong because they saw her grow up as a little girl. But when she bakes a man's son into a pie and has him eat it, no one really complains and they seem to be pretty desensitized to it. You can argue the same thing is happening to Daemon here. He can kill as many people as possible, but when he chokes Rhaenyra, controversy is sparked. This isn't me belittling domestic abuse or saying what Daemon did was okay, but it's interesting to note the dynamics between killing and how we feel about our characters and why that is. Daemon had killed his other wife literally earlier that season. Is it that far-fetched to say he would choke Rhaenyra? A big character point for Daemon is that when he gets mad, he commits violent acts, even to loved ones. For instance, he kills Daemon without thinking, beats a messenger, and mutilates a whole bunch of peasants because of his sense of justice. At the bare minimum, this indicates that he's extremely impulsive. You also have to factor in that Daemon loved his brother in Targaryen history, so him not knowing Aegon's prophecy and Rhaenyra shoving this in his face would definitely have set him off since Viserys decided to never tell him. And when you consider that, this seems less like a petty dispute and more like something he genuinely should be mad about. Post-time skip Daemon is extremely calm compared to pre-time skip, which makes good sense. He has a whole family now, and he spends his time reading instead of fighting in wars. Of course he goes back to King's Landing, but he doesn't really do anything brash. Although he cuts off Daemon's head, you could argue this was justified and logical to do so, because Daemon not only questioned and insulted his wife in front of him, but he also challenged Luke, who's obviously on Daemon's side. Daemon would be a pawn for the Greens, and him being kept alive could cause problems down the line, so killing him here would be pretty smart, especially since Daemon would have reason to do so, since Daemon just broke the law and called Rhea's kids bastards. This simply just isn't the same Daemon we saw earlier in the season, and that's supported even more at the War Council. While yes, he's more willing to go to war when you compare him to Rhaenyra, he's very strategical and not impulsive, showing his experience in Substones. With this calmer and more experienced Daemon comes the fact that he genuinely seems to care about Rhaenyra. It's been a lot of time bonding, and this was the woman that gave him heirs. He has been shown to go to great lengths for it, and while he did kill Lady Rhea, he was never shown physically abusing Laena, and he could even make a decision on giving her a C-section even though that would give him another child. So it would be out of character for him to hurt his new wife in this way after we've seen him grow so much. An executive producer even said it was a surprise for his character. It's a moment that I think it's surprising and shocking for Daemon as a character, but I also think it's one of those things that's been set up over the course of the entire season. So while yes, it was set up for the whole season, you can still argue that it doesn't make sense for Daemon to do this. I've seen some speculation of this online, and I definitely would love to give my 2 cents. There's definitely some discussion around nature versus nurture here, and how the show presents Aegon with very little screen time, which seems to indicate that he's an antagonist. But some people have defended him, which makes this an interesting topic to cover. I would also like to know that someone can be a victim and a villain. They're not mutually exclusive. In this case, we're seeing if he's more of a villain or more of a victim. Let's see which argument holds up. Aegon has obviously been abused by his parents, both mentally and physically. Viserys pretty much forgets he exists because he is his heir, and Alicent abuses him in multiple ways. Aegon literally has to ask Alicent if she loves him, to which she calls him an idiot. She also tells Aegon that it's okay to bully Aemon in private, but not in public. This behavior isn't productive in raising a child, and when you compare Alicent's children to Rhaenyra's, it makes sense. Because of these things, you could argue that Aegon is simply just a product of his environment. While yes, Aegon has better than 99.9% of people in Westeros, when you mix abusive parenting with people telling you you're more important than everyone else, and the promise of absolute power, then how do you expect a person to come out? You would also have to consider that we're comparing Aegon to our current moral standards. Everything Aegon does is bad, but you could argue that wasn't considered wrong in this universe, which could possibly give him some moral leeway when you consider the intent of his actions. If you never thought what he was doing was all that bad, then can you still morally condemn him? Not to mention that other kings like Robert were drunkards and rapists as well, but many wouldn't consider him to be as bad as Aegon. While Alicent Viserys being abusive explains the way Aegon is, it's just that, an explanation. It doesn't make him any less of a villain or his actions any better. There have been many instances of rulers who were in bad situations, but they didn't turn out as bad as Aegon. Sure, you can argue that people are simply just results of their circumstances, but that has no effect on how good of a person they are. Aegon is still a terrible person either way you cut it, even by that universe's standards. Him leaving his bastard kid in a fighting pit makes him worse for even the low standards in that world. Not only is he supporting child fighting, but leaving his own child there, which is also a bastard, is overwhelmingly bad when you add on everything else he's done. Alicent is a villain. So the last thing I'm going to talk about in this video is if Alicent is a villain herself. While this is quite similar to Aegon's case, it has other nuances I would like to touch on. First, I'm going to explain why this case is different than Aegon's. Alicent doesn't do anything explicitly as bad as Aegon, like rape or leave her kids in fighting pits. Although she is abusive, Aegon's actions are motivated primarily by self-indulgence, whereas Alicent seems to have a higher purpose, whether that be the Seven or what she genuinely thinks is good for the realm or her children. All this should be considered when comparing the two. Alicent isn't a villain because the scope of her actions contribute to a good cause. In my Team Green video, I outlined that the Greens were fighting for the greater good, which includes Alicent, and often we see her stopping Otto from going to war and doing things that are unnecessary, which is why there was a race to find Aegon in the first place. This implies that Alicent isn't being malicious, and she genuinely thinks that Rhaenyra would be bad for the realm. This isn't indicative of villain behavior at all. Otto would be more appropriate of being a villain here than anything. Rhae ruling has multiple problems, including her succession line being set up awkwardly, to the people of Westeros not accepting her, which is further outlined in my video here. All this means is that Alicent's motives are within reason and well-intentioned to protect the people and her children. This is even factoring in that she was manipulated by Otto, Viserys, and Larys. This manipulation to serve has obviously warped her worldview, and you could argue that her resulting actions aren't really on her, but more on the people manipulating her. Much like her son, the problems with Alicent is that she should be able to discern her actions from right and wrong. For example, you can argue that anyone who knowingly supports a drunk and a rapist to gain absolute power is in the wrong no matter what the circumstances are. You could apply this argument to everyone else on the green side, but what makes it even worse for Alicent is that she's a big reason why Aegon is this bad in the first place, but yet she does nothing to make him a better ruler or improve his mental state, while knowing that he's a rapist. Instead, she just devotes all of her time and energy into just getting him on the throne. Even if she has good intentions, these acts in themselves are pretty reprehensible, especially when you consider that the alternative choice for Aegon ruling isn't even that bad at worst. And at best, Rhaenyra is blatantly a better outcome than Aegon, making Alicent's whole cause for a rapist pretty pointless. Not to mention that she silences Diana even though she knows it's wrong, and the fact that she's a terrible parent, which we covered in the last section, makes all this a lot worse. If you enjoyed this video, then give it a like. In the meantime, watch this one. See you.